Are you ready to learn the truth about what lay hidden behind the luxurious facades of 19th century British mansions? From the outside, the lives of servants often seem stable and secure, but this illusion could shatter in an instant due to the slightest misstep. You can't even imagine the cruel and hidden rules that reign behind those closed doors. Huge residences required round-the-clock service, and workers labored at the limits of human endurance, remaining in the shadows of their masters. Any carelessness on a steep staircase or near a scorching kitchen stove could turn a valuable employee into a true social outcast overnight. The most striking thing is that people weren't simply fired for such mistakes. Their lives were shattered forever, and society turned its back on them. Watch the video to the end, and you'll learn how one tiny mistake could ruin a devoted servant's life forever and leave him without a roof over his head. What if I told you that everything you believed about Victorian domestic servants is a lie? A huge mansion functioned like a complex clockwork mechanism, requiring constant supervision and incredibly hard labor. Maids woke up at exactly 3 in the morning to stoke the cold fireplaces before the owners awoke. Heavy coal buckets had to be carried up narrow service staircases, completely hidden from the eyes of the estate's owners. Lighting was provided by gas jets or oil lamps, which required daily cleaning and refilling. These endless routine duties created the perfect environment for dangerous household situations to arise.
Just one more step.
Working in the kitchen required masterful handling of heavy cast-iron cookware and scorching hot metal stoves. Huge pots of boiling water were constantly being moved from one scorching burner to another.
Check the broth.
Cooks and kitchen staff worked under constant pressure, striving to meet strict serving schedules. The stone floors, slippery from grease and constant moisture, posed a constant threat to one's balance. Any misstep could lead to a heavy tray falling or dishes being accidentally knocked over. The tall front windows posed a particular danger, as they had to be thoroughly washed from the outside several times a month. Servants balanced on narrow stone ledges, holding onto a heavy wooden frame with one hand. Safety harnesses were not used, and safety depended entirely on the workers' own agility.
We need to go.
In winter, the stone ledges were covered with a thin layer of ice, making the work incredibly difficult. A fall from the third floor left no chance of a happy outcome. The house management rarely considered technical improvements to ensure the safety of its staff. Caring for the luxurious wardrobe also posed hidden health risks for the domestic laundresses. Huge copper vats for boiling laundry were heated over an open fire in stuffy basement rooms. Heavy, wet fabrics had to be wrung out by hand using massive wooden rollers. Caustic cleaning agents corroded the skin on their hands, making it vulnerable to any harsh external influences. Thick steam and high temperatures led to rapid physical exhaustion among the young workers. Delivering heavy loads to the upper floors fell entirely on the shoulders of the youngest staff. Firewood, water for washing, and coal were carried up steep stairs without the use of mechanical lifts. A person's center of gravity shifted significantly when carrying full buckets, making it difficult to distribute the weight properly. The constant strain on the joints of the legs and back led to premature wear and tear on the young bodies. Severe fatigue built up by the end of the day, critically reducing attention and reaction speed. This entire complex system was sustained by a deep fear of losing one's job and ending up on the street. The servants understood perfectly well that their personal security lay entirely in their own hands. The employers viewed the staff as an easily replaceable resource that ensured their daily comfort. Any weakness or clumsiness was perceived by management as absolute professional incompetence. It would be very interesting to hear your perspective on such harsh working conditions in the 19th century. What do you think about this kind of treatment of people? Please share your thoughts in the comments and be sure to subscribe to our channel. What lies behind the beautiful imagery of historical dramas is horrifying in its cold pragmatism. The main criterion for evaluating a servant in the Victorian era was their absolute physical functionality and endurance. Appearance, dexterity, and speed determined a worker's status in the household and the size of their monthly salary. Any physical limitation instantly reduced an employee's appeal in the eyes of a strict housekeeper or butler. Employers paid generously for impeccable service that allowed absolutely no hiccups or delays. Upon sustaining an injury, a worker automatically shifted from being a valuable asset to a heavy burden. In large households, there was absolutely no practice of assigning lighter work or temporarily transferring employees to safer positions. The duties of the absent employee placed an enormous additional burden on the shoulders of the remaining, already exhausted servants. Colleagues were physically unable to handle double the workload for long due to their already grueling daily schedule. This quickly led to discontent among the entire staff and forced management to take drastic personnel measures. The process of dismissing an injured person was lightning fast and completely devoid of sentimentality. The butler or housekeeper would simply pay the servant for the days worked and curtly show them the door. No severance pay or financial compensation for loss of earning capacity was provided for in principle. The law stood entirely on the employer's side, absolving them of any responsibility for the safety of their staff. Employment contracts were verbal and could be easily terminated at the employer's discretion at any moment. Formal public charity on the part of the nobility rarely extended to their own servants. The philanthropy of the Victorian aristocracy was directed mainly toward large-scale projects that brought them high-profile fame. Spending personal money on long-term medical care for a mere footman was considered an irrational use of financial resources. Employers preferred never to know the fate of dismissed servants, simply erasing them from their memory. The vast social distance between the influential employer and the servants precluded any display of personal compassion. The fear of instant, disgraceful dismissal hung like a heavy cloud over every inhabitant of the servants' quarters. This constant anxiety forced people to work at the limits of their physical and mental endurance. Any slight ailment was carefully concealed with the help of cosmetics and a tremendous effort of willpower. Maids continued to carry heavy loads up the stairs, gritting their teeth and overcoming extreme fatigue. The illusion of impeccable health was maintained at any cost in order to preserve their cherished jobs. The services of professional city doctors were incredibly expensive and completely out of reach for the service staff. A brief visit from a qualified doctor would cost as much as a junior maid's monthly salary. Free hospitals for the poor were rife with unsanitary conditions and a severe shortage of competent specialists. Seeking such medical care often only greatly exacerbated the initial health problem. Therefore, servants resorted to secret self-medication, using dubious folk remedies and herbal concoctions. Even the most minor incident could easily trigger an irreversible process of rapid social decline. The rigid class system offered no second chances to those who could not remain among the ranks of healthy workers. A person who had conscientiously devoted many years to serving a single family suddenly found themselves unwanted by anyone. I wonder how this complex issue of social vulnerability strikes you from the perspective of modern experience. Are you ready to discover in the next chapter exactly how servants masterfully concealed their problems in order to survive? The secret for which people pay thousands lies in the ability to make one's pain completely invisible to those around them. In prim Victorian society, the ability to masterfully conceal one's true condition was elevated to an absolute. For domestic servants, this skill became the primary tool for professional survival in harsh conditions. Appearing before demanding employers with a limp or a bandaged arm was tantamount to a gross insult. The aesthetic of the perfect home demanded perfect, cardboard cutout-like, completely invisible workers. Servants devised incredibly complex strategies to conceal the slightest traces of domestic mishaps. Dark, austere uniforms perfectly masked poor posture or slight stiffness of movement. Maids' wide, long skirts reliably helped hide problems with an even gait or balance. The footman's snow-white gloves completely concealed traces of working with chemicals or accidental burns. Every detail of their everyday attire served as a kind of armor, shielding them from the housekeeper's piercing gaze. The lack of open support from colleagues was not driven by cruelty, but by a basic instinct for self-preservation. By helping the weak, a worker took on someone else's duties and put their own job at serious risk. Strict supervisors ensured that everyone performed only their assigned workload. Any display of collective weakness was viewed as a potential threat to all the other servants. Therefore, the customary solidarity among the lower-ranking staff often gave way to cold, pragmatic efficiency. The quiet hours of the night became the only time when one could slightly relax the strict self-discipline. In cramped attic rooms, servants secretly used homemade splints and tight bandages. To quickly reduce swelling, they actively used cold water brought in jugs from the lower floors. Hard horsehair mattresses did nothing to help a weary body fully recover. A brief restless sleep would end precisely at 3 in the morning, and the endless cycle would begin anew. Cheap apothecary shops offered strange powders that only temporarily dulled the symptoms. These dubious remedies often contained dangerous substances that were addictive and caused general exhaustion. Constant use of such concoctions allowed them to scrape by for a few more weeks, drawing on their last reserves of strength. No one ever gave a thought to the long-term consequences of such an extreme method of maintaining productivity. The main and only task was to survive the current long day and avoid being spotted by the butler. The art of being completely invisible became the central tragedy of their isolated existence. If you're interested in learning such hidden details of the past, don't forget to support us. Be sure to like this video so we can continue to uncover interesting historical secrets. The hidden truth that everyone keeps quiet about is that cooking was one of the most dangerous professions. The Victorian kitchen resembled a noisy industrial workshop more than a cozy place for preparing food. Huge cast-iron stoves required constant stoking with coal and maintaining extremely high temperatures. Ventilation in the basement rooms left much to be desired, creating unbearable stuffiness and black soot. The constant heat from the open fire led to severe heat stroke and frequent deep fainting spells. Workers spent up to 14 hours a day in this harsh environment with absolutely no proper rest. Heavy copper and cast iron cookware was the main equipment in such spacious, classic kitchens. Huge pots filled with boiling water or scorching fat weighed several dozen kilograms. Moving these massive vessels from the stove to the tables required enormous physical effort from the women.
Don't let the fire go out.
The metal handles of the cookware became extremely hot, and even thick cloth pot holders did not always protect against burns. The slightest lapse in concentration was guaranteed to result in the hot contents spilling directly onto the cook's feet. The process of roasting meat on a massive open spit held a daily, unpredictable danger. Drops of molten hot fat would fly off the coals, landing on the cook's exposed skin. The cook's long, wide dresses could easily catch fire from a spark accidentally flying out of the hot firebox. Fire spread across the thin cotton fabric in a matter of seconds, leaving no chance for a quick escape. Safety precautions were completely absent, and sudden fires had to be extinguished using whatever was at hand. Sharp knives and heavy cleavers for butchering carcasses required professional skill and a steady hand. Amid constant rush and frankly poor lighting, workers' fingers were often cut by the blades. Handling raw meat in a cramped, high-temperature room created additional health risks. A simple deep cut could have serious consequences due to the lack of basic hygiene standards. The cooks would simply wrap their hands tightly in clean rags and stubbornly continue preparing dinner for the masters. Only the strongest and most incredibly resilient people survived such harsh conditions. Weaker candidates were weeded out in the very first months of this arduous and monotonous kitchen work. The kitchen truly drained people of their health, youth, and vitality, leaving absolutely nothing behind. Have you ever wondered how difficult the future fate was for those who left these houses forever? And in the next chapter, you will learn what awaited these unfortunate people beyond the threshold of the luxurious mansion.
Fresh vegetables here.
Once outside the wealthy employer's home, the dismissed servant was instantly confronted with the harsh reality of the city streets. Without a good letter of recommendation, finding legal work in a decent place was absolutely impossible. Meager personal savings, if they existed at all, were enough for only a few days of the cheapest lodging. The grim London slums quickly swallowed up those who had suddenly lost a stable income and social status. People soon found themselves surrounded by extreme poverty, street filth, and total hopelessness. Rooms in tenement buildings for the poor were tiny, dark, windowless cubicles. Often, several people would huddle together in one such cramped space, sleeping directly on the bare, cold floor. Complete unsanitary conditions and constant dampness instantly destroyed the last remnants of a former worker's health. A meager daily diet consisting of stale bread and thin soup led to extreme physical exhaustion. Breaking free from this vicious cycle of poverty without outside financial assistance was absolutely impossible. Physical disability in the harsh 19th century was practically a final social death sentence. Government social support programs for such people were in their infancy. Numerous charitable organizations simply could not cope with the enormous, unending stream of needy city dwellers. Society treated the disabled with contempt, viewing them as a completely useless burden on the economy. Their bleak fate was to quietly vegetate on the fringes of civilization with no hope of improvement. The final refuge for the utterly destitute and sick was the grim workhouse. These austere institutions were specifically created by the state to isolate the poorest segments of the urban population. Living conditions in the vast workhouse were deliberately made as harsh and psychologically degrading as possible. In the massive brick workhouses, families were ruthlessly separated, with men, women, and the elderly placed in different blocks. The inmates were forced daily to perform meaningless and arduous labor, such as unraveling old ship's ropes. Food was extremely meager and consisted mainly of watery, bland porridge and very stale bread. The slightest violation of the strict discipline was met with corporal punishment and complete deprivation of the daily ration. Former servants, accustomed to a certain way of life, broke down very quickly under such terrible conditions. Thus ended the life cycle of people whose only valuable asset was their own health. The luxurious, bright facades of Victorian buildings reliably concealed thousands of broken human destinies behind them. History has carefully preserved the names of the owners of these palaces, but the names of their humble servants have been erased forever. Their hard labor became the invisible foundation of the era, something it was not customary to speak of aloud in drawing rooms. These ordinary people paid too high a price for the comfort of British high society. What would happen if no one ever learned of this terrifying engineering oversight from the past? The very architecture of luxurious Victorian mansions harbored many hidden dangers for the service staff. The houses were designed exclusively with the aesthetic demands of their very wealthy owners in mind.
I'm sure of it.
The vast space was divided into a grand, opulent public area and a completely hidden service zone. Service areas were always created as an afterthought, disregarding the basic laws of physics and ergonomics. It was precisely these narrow, convoluted labyrinths that became the site of daily, unpredictable accidents. The main problem was the so-called black staircases, designed exclusively for the servants' rapid movement. They were built incredibly narrow and very steep to save valuable living space in the large building. The wooden steps were often of uneven height, which severely disrupted the natural, even rhythm of walking. Handrails were either completely absent or too awkward to grip securely with one free hand. Navigating such a staircase with a tray or a full bucket required the skills of a professional circus acrobat. Lighting on these long service staircases was kept to an absolute minimum for the sake of constant economy. Dim gas lamps were located only on the wide landings, leaving the stairwells themselves in thick semi-darkness. Servants constantly had to descend practically by touch, running a high risk of stumbling at any moment. At night, the meager lighting was turned off entirely, turning the staircases into dark, bottomless wells. It was here that the vast majority of serious falls occurred, putting a definitive end to a worker's career. The heavy oak doors in the building's service area very often opened directly into the narrow corridors. A door that suddenly swung open could easily knock down a person walking quickly with a heavy load in their hands. The design never provided for any windows to allow natural daylight into these hidden passageways. Stale air and a complete lack of ventilation contributed to very rapid fatigue during work. The architects gave absolutely no thought to how people would safely navigate such cramped spaces. The deep chutes for dropping dirty laundry to the lower floors posed a particular and completely unpredictable danger. They were located in the darkest corners of the corridors and were rarely covered with reliable, heavy lids. In the morning rush, it was very easy to slip and fall into this deep vertical shaft. The dimensions of these service chutes were large enough for an adult to fall through completely. Such hidden architectural traps lay in wait for the weary servants at literally every step of their routine route.
There's someone above.
The huge windows on the upper ceremonial floors were massive and very difficult to open for ventilation. The wooden frames constantly jammed, requiring the worker to exert considerable physical force. When trying to open such a heavy window, a servant could lose his balance and fall out. No safety railings were ever installed on the wide window sills facing the street. The appearance of the beautiful facade was considered far more important than the safety of those who maintained it on a regular basis. All this complex architecture created a hostile environment where human error was punished with the utmost severity. The buildings were designed exclusively for the comfort of the masters, completely ignoring the needs of those who created that comfort. The vast house turned into a dangerous obstacle course that had to be navigated every working day. This attitude toward architectural space vividly reflected a general disregard for the lower classes. Servants were viewed as mere mechanisms that were expected to function flawlessly under any given conditions. No one attempted to change this system as long as it continued to function and yield results. Would you like to know exactly how Victorian society justified such a cruel state of affairs? And in the next chapter, you'll learn why no one even attempted to legally protect these people's rights. In Victorian England, the complete lack of protection for workers' rights was not an accidental oversight by politicians or lawmakers. This harsh state of affairs was rooted in the powerful and well-thought-out ideological foundation of the time. Society firmly believed in a strict social hierarchy where every person occupied the place assigned to them from birth.
Now, what do we
The aristocracy sincerely believed that extreme poverty was the result of personal, moral failings and natural laziness. Therefore, any attempts to improve the situation of ordinary servants were perceived as an outrageous violation of the natural order.
of it all, isn't it?
The British legal system fully reflected the interests of the upper classes, who owned large estates. Labor relations were still governed by outdated laws that did not account for the new realities of the industrial era. The concept of an employer's responsibility for workplace safety simply did not exist in the conservative minds of the judges. It was believed that by agreeing to work, an adult servant voluntarily accepted all associated risks. Any lawsuits against employers filed by injured former workers were doomed to fail from the outset. The church also played a very important ideological role in maintaining this harsh social status quo. Sunday sermons persistently called on the lower classes to practice absolute humility, obedience, and patient endurance of life's hardships.
Slow to anger.
Hard, exhausting labor and suffering were publicly proclaimed as great virtues, highly pleasing to the higher powers. Such religious rhetoric completely deprived the weary servants of the moral right to actively protest or demand better conditions. Religion offered fleeting consolation in the afterlife, completely ignoring the glaring injustice of earthly existence. High society was dominated by a fashionable cult of self-help and rapid individual financial success. Popular literature persistently instilled the idea that only through hard, honest work could one achieve great prosperity. Anyone who suddenly suffered a setback or injury was branded a lazy failure, unworthy of any sympathy. This harsh philosophical concept easily justified any manifestation of absolute social indifference toward the poor. The strong always survived, while the weak were ruthlessly cast aside without the slightest regret. The economy of vast country estates demanded constant minimization of costs for all service personnel. Paying regular compensation or supporting elderly servants who could no longer work would have blown a hole in the aristocrats' budget. Cheap, disenfranchised labor was the main foundation of the luxurious lifestyle of the entire upper class. Changing this convenient system threatened to rapidly destroy the established economic order of an entire vast empire. Therefore, the ruling class fiercely resisted any, even the most insignificant, social reforms in this sphere. The conservative medical community also showed no scientific interest in the occupational problems of domestic servants. Renowned doctors studied the complex illnesses of the aristocracy, completely ignoring the specific physical deterioration of working people's bodies. There were absolutely no official statistics on occupational injuries in the vast domestic service sector. A rigid ideology of indifference firmly cemented social inequality, making it the absolute norm of life. It turned millions of people into powerless and easily replaceable cogs in a vast social machine. The tragedy of a single dismissed servant was merely an imperceptible speck of dust on the majestic facade of a great empire. The entire system was designed to shield the upper class as much as possible from any unpleasant sights or thoughts. Real pain and quiet despair remained forever behind the tightly closed doors of the service quarters.
Good evening,
In the
Miss Evelyn.
Victorian era,
The mistress
domestic
of the
servants' clothing served not only as a social marker,
Is everything
but
prepared?
also as a tool of control. Uniforms were specifically designed to emphasize the high status of the household as much as possible, rather than the comfort of the wearer. Maids' stiff corsets severely restricted movement and hindered normal breathing during strenuous physical labor. Long, wide skirts constantly got tangled underfoot on steep staircases, posing a constant risk of falling.
Yes, ma'am.
Aesthetics were always prioritized far above mere practicality in the basic safety of workers. The starched, stiff collars and high cuffs of the footmen rubbed the skin raw, causing deep and painful sores. This crucial garment detail had to remain immaculately white throughout the long workday. Any tiny speck of soot or sauce could be grounds for a hefty fine or a public reprimand. Workers were under constant stress,
Just a moment.
nervously monitoring the cleanliness of their extremely uncomfortable uniforms.
Catch my breath.
Such petty control over appearance was an effective form of constant psychological pressure.
Another day done.
The fabrics used to make the everyday uniforms were often cheap, very thick, and completely non-breathable. On hot days, long hours of work in the kitchen or laundry room in such restrictive clothing turned into a real ordeal. Profuse sweating inevitably led to severe skin irritation and constant physical discomfort. In winter, on the other hand, the maids' thin cotton dresses offered absolutely no warmth in the cold, drafty stone corridors. The workers constantly teetered on the fine line between catching a cold and suffering severe heat stroke. The formal ceremonial liveries of senior footmen and butlers were usually made of heavy velvet and thick wool. This ceremonial attire was incredibly heavy and severely restricted the range of motion of the arms and shoulders. Lifting luggage or moving massive furniture while wearing such ceremonial attire was physically difficult. Gold decorative embroidery and massive metal buttons added weight to the garment, placing an additional strain on the back. The luxurious appearance inevitably demanded enormous daily physical exertion from the wearer of the livery. Strict rules categorically forbade servants from removing any part of their heavy uniform, even during rare moments of rest. A maid was not allowed to loosen the tight lacing of her corset while in her attic room on a sunny day. The body was constantly confined in a rigid fabric straitjacket from early morning until late at night. This severely impaired blood circulation and inevitably led to constant headaches and frequent fainting spells. The uniform functioned as a rigid external framework, effectively disciplining not only the body but also the mind. The high cost of the first uniform was often ruthlessly deducted from the worker's meager salary during the first year of service. This immediately created financial dependence and deprived the worker of the opportunity to save money for a rainy day. Accidental damage to the expensive uniform due to an accident meant new, enormous, unforeseen expenses for the servant. Servants took better care of their work clothes than of their own health, risking themselves to preserve the valuable fabric. A ruined coat could lead to immediate, scandalous dismissal without the right to be reinstated in the same position. The uniform was the most visible and obvious symbol of rigid class division and complete powerlessness. Every minute of the day, it reminded the ordinary worker of his lowly place in the vast social hierarchy. There was only one way to shed these heavy fabric shackles, by leaving the wealthy household forever. But the price of such freedom in Victorian England was too high for a simple, uneducated person. Therefore, people continued to wear their extremely uncomfortable uniforms, meekly accepting the cruel rules of the game. In addition to obvious and acute injuries, working in a vast Victorian household led to the development of numerous hidden occupational problems. These invisible problems accumulated over the years, gradually and inevitably destroying the human body from within. They rarely led to immediate dismissal, but very slowly and surely reduced the worker's overall efficiency. Ultimately, upon reaching a critical mass, such hidden defects inevitably became the cause of inevitable expulsion. The body wore down just as inevitably as metal parts grind down in a complex factory mechanism. Constant, painstaking work in dimly lit rooms drastically reduced natural visual acuity. Fine sewing, silver polishing, and reading instructions by the dim light of tallow candles led to severe eye strain. By the age of 30, many experienced maids were physically unable to perform fine work without making frustrating mistakes. Eyeglasses were an extremely expensive luxury, completely out of reach for ordinary wage earners of the time. Loss of vision meant automatic unfitness for the job and a swift transfer to heavier, dirtier work. The specific damp environment of basement kitchens and laundry rooms caused chronic respiratory problems. The air there was thick with coal dust, hot steam, and the acrid fumes of chemical cleaning agents. Constant inhalation of this dangerous mixture led to persistent coughing and irritation of the mucous membranes. In the harsh conditions of London smog, these symptoms were greatly exacerbated, quickly progressing to severe chronic conditions. Complaining about the lack of fresh air was completely pointless, as no one had any intention of improving ventilation. Constantly carrying heavy loads left an indelible and devastating mark on the spines of the junior staff. Severe postural deformities and chronic back pain were occupational companions of young footmen and maids. Due to the lack of proper nighttime rest, the spinal disc simply did not have time to recover during the brief hours of sleep. Over time, a person's figure would become unnaturally twisted, a condition that was clearly visible even through the strict, tight-fitting uniform. The loss of a straight posture permanently rendered a servant unfit for work in the formal, representative part of the house. Constant, prolonged contact of the hands with cold water and lye led to serious skin damage. The thin skin on the hands of dishwashers and laundresses quickly cracked, became covered with sores, and lost normal sensitivity.
It always does, Mum. Just breathe.
These deep wounds would not heal for months due to the complete lack of proper medical care and continued exposure to irritants. Hiding such disfigured hands from the watchful housekeeper became more and more difficult with each passing day. The disfigured appearance of their hands permanently blocked the path to higher and more prestigious positions in the household hierarchy. The acute lack of sunlight in the dark service corridors inevitably led to a deficiency of vital vitamins. An aristocratic pallor was considered the norm for servants, but behind it lay a dangerous general exhaustion of the body. Brittle bones made even the slightest falls extremely dangerous to their future health. The poor and monotonous diet in the servants' kitchen greatly exacerbated this hidden physiological crisis. People literally withered away in these dark and cold stone labyrinths with no access to fresh air.
We are here.
Severe psychological exhaustion was yet another invisible, yet incredibly powerful and destructive enemy. The need to constantly and strictly control one's emotions and anticipate the slightest wishes of the masters wore down the nervous system. Stress built up quickly, leading to severe insomnia, constant anxiety, and nervous breakdowns. In the Victorian era, such conditions were not considered serious illnesses, but were dismissed as mere whims or bad temper. For even the slightest display of nervousness, a servant could be accused of insolence and immediately shown the door. Hearing also suffered greatly due to the constant, loud noise in the mansion's busy work areas. The clatter of heavy dishes, the loud ringing of summoning bells, and the hissing of steam created a continuous background noise in the kitchen. Over time, exhausted workers began to hear the quiet commands of the housekeeper or the strict butler much less clearly. This inevitably led to mistakes in their work, delays, and as a result, very serious reprimands from their superiors. Deafness made it absolutely impossible to perform important duties, requiring a very quick response to the master's call. All these numerous invisible ailments quickly shaped the image of an old, worn-out servant. The main paradox was that these people became truly old by the age of 40. Their bodies depleted their natural reserves twice as fast as those of the upper class. They gave away their health drop by drop, monotonously performing endless routine work day after long day. It was a very slow physical decline in the shadow of someone else's splendor and immense social prosperity. When the accumulation of health problems exceeded the permissible limit, the system ruthlessly cast the person aside. His place was taken that very same day by a young, vigorous, and perfectly healthy candidate from a distant village. This endless cycle of human resources in the grand mansions never stopped for a single second. The old, sick workers quietly faded into oblivion, taking their invisible devastation with them forever. The machine of Victorian comfort continued to run smoothly, constantly demanding more and more human sacrifices. To sum up, one can safely say that the life of Victorian servants was like walking a tightrope. Their impeccable appearance always concealed immense daily physical and mental strain. These ordinary people existed in a parallel reality governed by entirely different, brutal laws of survival. Their world was strictly confined within the dark walls of service corridors and the rigid framework of job descriptions. Any deviation from these boundaries, even involuntary, was punished with the ultimate penalty of social ostracism. The price of a single misstep was disproportionately high by modern standards of labor justice. A simple slip on a wet floor could instantly reduce decades of loyal service to dust. Past great achievements held absolutely no weight in the face of a sudden physical disability. Employers held absolute and unchallenged power over the fates of those who ensured their daily comfort. This power was exercised with extreme coldness, calculation, and absolutely no pangs of a master's conscience. A state system for protecting workers was completely absent, leaving people to face their misfortune alone. At that time, there were no insurance policies, no labor unions, and no laws capable of protecting the weak against the strong. Saving those who were drowning was solely the responsibility of the drowning themselves and their desperate servants. This harsh reality quickly shaped the distinct, extremely secretive, and wary character of the Victorian worker. They learned to trust only themselves and to masterfully mask any physical or moral weaknesses. High society preferred to turn a blind eye to the dark side of its incredible prosperity. The dazzling glamour of the ballrooms reliably blinded those who had absolutely no desire to see the tears in the laundries. The prevailing ideology justified this cruelty with economic expediency and the so-called natural order of things. Human life was completely devalued to the level of an easily replaceable cog in the vast machinery of the home. Moral anguish was reserved exclusively for novels, while in reality, a very strict economic pragmatism prevailed. The tragic fate of those who found themselves cast out onto the streets served as a grim warning to the rest. Huge workhouses and filthy slums quickly swallowed up those who could not meet the high demands of the era. There was practically no return from this deep social abyss for any of the former servants. The fear of such an outcome forced people to work beyond the limits of human physical endurance every single day. It was the most perfect instrument of coercion, requiring absolutely no use of brute physical force. Today, we sincerely admire the architecture and opulent interiors of historic British mansions. We film beautiful TV series about them, heavily romanticizing the relationships between the masters and their devoted servants. Understanding the true state of affairs allows us to permanently remove the rose-colored glasses of historical nostalgia. The Victorian era was a time of great technical discoveries and great monstrous social injustice. The contrast between the incredible luxury of the drawing rooms and the extreme poverty of the dismissed servants was truly horrifying. This important historical lesson clearly shows how vital legal protection of the basic rights of every working person is. Without reliable legal safeguards, any worker remains completely vulnerable to their wealthy employer. Large-scale technological progress eventually changed working conditions, making large homes much safer. The advent of bright electric lighting, convenient elevators, and central heating significantly eased the difficult lives of the service staff. However, changing society's mindset required far more precious time and enormous efforts from reformers. The right to safe and paid work was won through decades of persistent and complex political struggle. All modern safety standards are based exclusively on the bitter experiences of those past generations. By studying the complex history of everyday life, we gain a much deeper understanding of the value of modern social achievements. What seems like an absolute norm today was once an unattainable dream for millions of disenfranchised workers. Fair compensation, paid sick leave, and pensions saved modern people from the fate of Victorian outcasts. We have traveled a very long and difficult path from absolute powerlessness to the emergence of modern labor codes. This evolution of society's humanity is no less important than the rapid development of modern technology. Every worn step on the narrow service staircase remembers the heavy footsteps of those who gave their strength to it. These cold walls were silent witnesses to profound dramas that were never written about in the morning papers. And although those cruel times are long past, their harsh historical lessons must not be forgotten. The history of domestic servants is the story of a vast invisible front where human destinies were decided every day. And a single mistake in this world could truly ruin a life forever and irrevocably. We hope you found this journey into the hidden world of Victorian mansions truly fascinating. History is full of amazing secrets that are far from always visible behind the luxurious historical facades. Please let us know what other historical topics or hidden aspects of life in the past you'd like to see in our upcoming videos.